Hi, this is Shafi Naqi Jamai from BBC Urdu. Welcome to World Have You Say.
Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. Welcome to the programme. Well, it was a crime that was captured in real time on social media. The hacking to death of a British soldier on a London street in broad daylight. Lee Rigby was targeted by Michael Adebowale and Michael Adebolajo, and then he was run over. They attempted to behead him with meat cleavers. With blood on their hands, they approached passers-by who were filming the murder. The only reason we've killed this man today is because Muslims are dying daily by British soldiers. By Allah, we swear by the Almighty Allah, we will never stop fighting you until you leave us alone. So why is a religion regarded by millions around the world as peace-loving causing some people to commit horrific acts of violence in its name? From the attacks of 9/11 to London bombings to the suicide attacks in Iraq carried out by Muslims on Muslims, what can be done to fight Islamic extremism? Well, I'm joined by a number of people to discuss this over the next half an hour or so. If you've got any comments, if you want to get involved, head to Facebook or you can use the hashtag WHYS on Twitter. I'm pleased to say that Jeff Mirza, who is a Muslim comic, joins me here in the World Have You Say studio. Jumped off a train to come in, so I do appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you. Also on the line is Imran Awan, who is a criminologist at Birmingham City University in the UK, and Kiran Opal describes herself as an ex-Muslim. We'll get into that in a moment. She is on the line from Toronto in Canada. Jeff, first of all, as a UK citizen, as somebody who is in this country, you're only too aware of the horror of what happened on that street in Woolwich. What do you think is the answer to stop young men like the two we saw on the streets of London from carrying out those kind of things in the name of your religion?
Well, I just want to say that when I saw that on the TV, I mean, it's horrifying. Like the rest of Britain and the rest of the world, it's like it was an unbelievable thing. You could not have, written a script. It was so disgusting. It was just a horrible act took place, and everyone should condemn that. And me and my family, when we watched it on the screen, that's what we said. It was absolutely disgusting. And then it sunk in that these people are using our religion for that, and and they're trying to justify it and whatever in a kind of convoluted way, trying to sort of crowbar our religion into their disgusting act. I mean, if I knew what could stop it, if there was a button that I could switch to flick it off, honestly, I would, because it's it's one of those things. I mean, I've got a joke about it. On TV they've got a program about Muslims. It's on every night. You might have seen it. It's called The News. And I mean, when Muslims aren't on the news, it's like that is news for me. So I don't know the answer. I mean, people have looked at things like, is it to do with anti-Americanism or anti-Israel, or was it Bosnia that started it, or was it Palestine or whatever, or is it Iraq? And I think if any one of those things disappeared, maybe we would have less of these. Or was it Afghanistan? Or is it because they're poor, some people from poor Muslim communities up north, and just when you think it's because of that poverty, then you find a rich Muslim person's doing it? Or is it someone from Pakistan? Then you find that people from African origin are doing it. So it's like it's a global event or a global thing that's going on. I mean, it's horrible and it's like sickening. What they will say is they'll say, but you don't see the other side of it and whatever. I mean, that's the justification. I don't know the full answer to it. It's just one of those things. It may be that all across history, young men at different stages, if we look, for example, at America, at the shootings that take place, these inexplicable people who go into a school and shoot people. Maybe some of these people are unhinged like those people in the school, and those people have justifications. Everybody in their mind has a justification. I just don't think that anything justifies what we saw that day.
Imran, come into the conversation. What's your thoughts?
Evening. I'd just like to mirror the points that Jeff has made already, in the sense that as a Muslim living in Britain, as soon as I saw the horrific events of that day, it was completely a shock, extremely abhorrent. And, I think the Muslim community in general has done a good job in coming out and condemning this, in the strongest possible terms. Unfortunately, again, as mentioned previously, there is no single sort of pathway towards radicalization of young Muslim men like this. So there are a number of different ways and methods in which these people are being radicalized to have a very warped understanding of Islam. Let's be very clear and frank about this today. Islam does not promote any type of killing of anybody, full stop. And I think what happens in a number of these cases, it starts with this sort of feeling of inequality according to these terrorists. And that inequality then progresses and it leads to grievances. And as has already been mentioned, it sort of conflates the argument by saying, look, what's happening in Iraq, Afghanistan is the reason. However, what we tend to see once they begin this argument is an extremely sort of self-defensive mechanism, almost a way of them lacking some sort of critical discussion. Because I think most of us would agree, if you have a problem, say, with what's happening, then it's quite easy to leave Britain and go and live somewhere else. And, I would add, if you want to make a change, if you're that upset about government policy, then, get involved in the process, get involved in the democratic way of making change, as opposed to this sort of pure evil that was committed that day.
Let's bring in Karan in from Toronto. I'm interested that you describe yourself as an ex-Muslim. Just explain that to us.
Yes, hi. So I was raised Muslim in a Muslim family. I'm from Pakistan, a Muslim majority country. However, over time I realized that for me, Islam was not, it was just a religion like any other religion. I did a lot of research into it. I studied it in depth. And for me, it became a matter of not agreeing with basic ideas of how the world is seen and how, the idea of God is seen in Islam. And I also, like I said, I'm an atheist. I'm not, or an agnostic atheist, and I don't believe in any of the other religions as being the correct one either. However, I think what we're talking about here is not just a matter of theological debate. I think we are talking about a political, socio-economic context for the extremism that we have seen, that is the content of this show. And I do agree with my the colleagues that I've heard so far that this is a very complex and complicated issue. It's not that we cannot just look at one aspect. There are political, economic issues that surround the alienation that I think a lot of people feel who are from Muslim backgrounds. I believe that alienation, that sense of isolation, that sense of othering of Muslims versus everybody else is fed and strengthened by community leaders, quote unquote, and by religious clerics of certain kind. Not all of them, but some of them actually do have built careers on continuing to feed that sense of alienation. And this is happening all across the world, in the UK and outside. We are seeing a lot of funding for very hard right-wing Salafi type of ideology that's coming from Saudi Arabia, which is funding a lot of the mosques and religious schools in the UK and in other places, in other parts of the world. And that's feeding this ideology. There are many kinds of Islam. There are many different interpretations, many visions of what Islam means. And there are many different kinds of Muslims. So it's not that all Muslims are extremists. It's that the ones who are extremists are the ones who are getting put on BBC, for example. Anjem Choudhury
of course, and Anjem Choudhury was, you're absolutely right, on the Today programme on the BBC Today, and there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter throughout the day of whether that was right or wrong. Anjem Choudhury has actually been on World Have Your Say in years gone by. In fact, Jeff, was he on a programme with you? I shared
a cab with him, and we had a comedy situation. We were in a cab, and we lived quite close to each other, and so... It was quite comical because we're in the cab and I started asking questions and his whole argument fell apart in the cab. Anyway, I won't go into it.
He basically was part of Al Majharoon, which is a banned organisation in the UK, has headed many religious organisations in the UK, but is widely regarded as an extremist who wouldn't condemn the Woolwich attacks. I think most people listening to this would not for a moment suggest that all Muslims are involved in this. I guess what's interesting, if you like, is that if you look at attacks around the world, there aren't many other religions where people use violence in the name of their religion. It seems to be something which is...
Because we've lost control of the brand. That's what's happened, you see. Right. Someone in another part of the world, why did you do that? Oh, because of Islam. Because so-and-so offended so-and-so. Why was there was a story with a teddy bear a few years ago, someone called a teddy bear Muhammad, and that person for that reason. So Islam is something that lots of Muslims have brought out when it suits them. I mean, you mentioned Anjem Choudhury. I remember sitting in a cab with him and saying to him, well, Anjem, why don't you get a job? why are you using British money? Because I was having like a light-hearted conversation. Why are you using British money? You know, you're condemning Britain and yet you've got no problem about taking money. And he said, no, it's not Britain's money, it's Allah's money. And I said, oh, come on. You know, when you want to suddenly, you know, you flip the argument. And so that kind of argument, those people need to be confronted, but they shouldn't be overblown like they are the community leaders, because they are not the community leaders. They are people in their own community, are very small fry. They're just so not important.
Yeah. And I was
they're
just
they're often self-appointed. There's no actual system for these community leaders, quote unquote. And sorry to interject, but I think that one of the issues is I do think that there are problematic verses in the Quran. I think there are problematic hadiths in the hadiths.
Can I just stop you with a quote there?
However,
there's a quote.
However, that is not unique to Islam.
But Kiran, can I just give you a quote? Do not think that I have come for peace. I have come with the sword to make mother fight father.
I'm not sure
and you know where that quote is from? Matthew 10:34. And I usually say that in my stand-up. People often think that that's a quote from the Quran. It's a quote from the Bible.
I'm not sure if you heard the rest of what I was saying, which I was saying is that it's not unique to Islam. However, we have to acknowledge that it also is in Islam. And what as somebody who does not believe in Christianity either, I do not agree with that Matthew verse that you said as well. And what I'm saying is that Christianity has historically been used to justify violence as well. So let's not forget.
And atheism as well.
Yes,
atheism as well. I mean, Chairman Mao, Stalin, these people weren't religious and they caused a lot of problems.
Exactly.
They did not commit what they did. They did not commit what they did and justify it with atheism. The difference is that
they justified it with communism, didn't they?
Can I just interject?
Kiran, just take a breath. Go in, Imran.
Sorry. In terms of the whole religious debate, and it's been made clear that yes, religion has been used. We know from the Crusades, you know, that there was a whole array of Muslims who were murdered historically. But it also adds to the narrative that there is, secular extremists, there are animal rights extremists, there are religious extremists. In my mind, the Rohingya who are being murdered and who are using, the monks and the Buddhists are using their sort of...
They've even got Buddhist extremists now.
And you're right, but it's not across the world. I mean, if you look at where, you know, and I want to keep this in perspective, but if you look at attacks carried out by a minority of Muslims in the name of Islam, it stretches from Nigeria to Syria to Iraq to the West. It goes everywhere. These other instances, other obviously than the Christian Crusades, which, you know, go so far back, they are limited to certain regions. And I just wonder if it's simply a case of the sheer number of people who are Muslims in the world. When you've got 1 billion Muslims, you're just going to have a few nutters who decide to use it, or whether there is something that is being wrongly interpreted. I'm just curious on what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, there's 2 points there. Sorry, and then I'll let somebody else jump in. Of course, there is the issue that maybe it's more Muslims, or maybe, you know, the population, all that. But I do think fundamentally there are issues in the way people are interpreting some of the faith. You know, I'm a Muslim. I believe that Islam is a religion of peace. And the way I read the Quran is probably totally different to the way Anjum Chowdhury is reading the Quran, and is different to somebody else. And I don't think we should be blaming the Quran. We should blame the person who's reading it. And I think this is where the problem comes, because there are clearly madrasas and schools of thought, maybe in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, where they do sort of emphasize this sort of wrong interpretation. And I think that is critical in this discourse, is that it is easy to label terrorism with the word Islamist and Muslim with the word extremist, but surely there needs to be a way where we look back and say, look, extremism is extremism, you know, whether it's anti-capitalism, whether it's anti-abortionist, whether it's animal rights, and let's look at it from that point of view.
Well, I think, if I may, I absolutely agree with some of your arguments. Absolutely. There is not one way to interpret, let's say, Islam. There are different Muslims. If all Muslims were extremists, then we would have 1.5 billion extremists in the world, and we don't. So obviously that is not the majority view. I think majority of Muslims are good people. They're just like everybody else. There's nothing specially wrong with Muslims. There's nothing that creates that makes them different. It's what happens. I think, like what I was saying earlier, is that there are economic and political issues. There's a sense of alienation. I think that there's anti-Muslim bigotry that is often said, and I do think that those factors go into it. But like our host is saying about how this is happening across the board in different countries, I'm not saying that Islam is to blame, the Quran is to blame. What I'm saying is that there are things in the Bible, there are things in the Quran, there are things in the Veda, in the Hindu text, that are problematic. And I'm not saying that it's that stuff to blame. It's people who actually enact those things. But the fact is that if we don't even acknowledge that they're there, then how are we supposed to even address the issues that for some people, that's what they use to justify the violence that they enact?
Yeah, but some of the people who I think the people who condemn these things should be a bit more empowered. I mean, going back to what you said earlier on about someone like Anjem Chowdhury on the radio this morning. He's somebody who's been overblown. We saw that with Abu Hamza. We saw it with Sheikh Omar Bukhari. These people didn't really represent anybody at their meetings. There'd be like 4 people sitting there who were there from the night before or whatever. They really haven't got a following. But
I agree.
They were so overblown. I mean, we would see on the Sun. I don't read the Sun, but you'd just see it on there. You see him on the front cover. You'd see Abu Hamza there with his hook, and it became like he was the only Muslim in the world.
Abu Hamza became almost a caricature, didn't he? He's now been deported to Jordan to face terror charges, but for a long time he
Abu Qatada.
Sorry, Abu Qatada. Yeah. But it became almost a caricature, didn't it, of people. I want to read this comment to you, which is coming from Alex in Kenya. He posted on Facebook, "The answer is for the rest of the world to respect Islam." And Melissa has replied on our Facebook page saying, "I agree that Islamophobia does play a role in radicalisation as well. Having faced many insults myself, I know how cold it can make you feel towards people and how much of an outsider that you can feel." Obviously, that's not an excuse, but it can play a role as part of radicalisation.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm on the streets of Britain, we see burkas.
What I want to know is how are we defining Islamophobia here? Are we talking about where people are making racial and ethnic slurs towards people who are of Muslim background, or are we talking about questioning religion? Because if we're talking about questioning religion, then it's really no different from questioning Christianity, from questioning Judaism, which is done all the time. So what I'm wondering is what do you mean by Islamophobia here?
Kieran, can I just interrupt you there? Those 2 killers in Woolwich, they weren't having a theological debate. Muslims have got no problem with anyone discussing their religion, criticising their religion as like a theological debate. So it's very important to remember that what drove those people, I think, was the fact that they were evil people who happened to be Muslim.
Yeah, I agree. And
I don't think they didn't read a book in the morning and thought, right, we've got to do this, because most of them, I'm not saying they were literate, but I mean, one of them was educated, but I'm just saying the interpretation, they weren't Muslims who really did it for religious purposes. I think they just did it because they would have been people who would have murdered. I'm not saying that I know for 100%, but they seem like the kind of people who would have murdered or been like that if they had a choice or if they had a chance.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I'd just like to add also, just simply, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was on Twitter, and as the verdicts were read, I put up some tweets, and in particular one that mentioned quite clearly that Islam is against this, and these people, Adabalaja, Adabawale, do not represent Muslims or Islam. And I think that was mentioned in the trial that Islam is not on trial. But as soon as I sent this, I got a huge array of initially quite critical theological discussion via Twitter, which is quite hard in 140 whatever characters it is. But somebody literally almost like a cut and paste job from the Quran, this verse, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look...
And they say things like, you'll go to hell, you're the unbeliever, you're the kafir.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said, look, I'm happy to have a sensible discussion with anybody, but the amount of trolling I got, if to say a better phrase, was quite shocking, and I think that's quite revealing as well in terms of how people viewed this incident and why that constant reference to Islam and Muslims is made.
One thing I would say, if I can interrupt, is with some of the Muslim communities in this country, and there are communities rather than just one community, is that the amount of there's a tolerance level is not there. Some of these people who do this trolling on the Twitter, they do not understand that if you disagree with me, that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. And they need to go back to their religion and realise when Islam was there were other religions there at the same time. So tolerance is part of the religion. There's lots of quotes in the Quran about tolerance. Well, why don't you, or other religions? So they should look to that. So I think that the space has disappeared, the tolerance. Everyone is trying to deliver a knockout blow.
Well, let's bring
yeah.
in Asghar Bukhari, who is founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, joining us on the line from London. I know you've been listening to our conversation. What are your thoughts on this?
Thoughts is that, and I only have heard a small segment of the previous speakers, is that I think they're completely right off the radar. The reason why these people committed the crime is because of foreign policy. They said it, all the experts are saying it, and anyone who denies that simply is not on the same page when it comes to why Muslims are taking to terrorism. It's very, very simple. It's not heebie-jeebies. It's not magic. It's as simple as this. When young Muslims, an increasing number of Muslims who are more media savvy than their forefathers and have access to information because of the internet, see the terrible atrocities happening right around the world, from drone strikes to kidnappings and torture, etc., they become very, very angry. And as a result of that anger, they need to channel that anger somehow and say, I want to stop this. I'm angry at what I see around the world. And what the government has done is, by failing to admit that it's foreign policy and blaming a perverted version of Islam, or they hate our freedom, all these kind of fairy tale kind of arguments, what they've done is they've demonized these people into a us versus them kind of back-to-back war. And so these people no longer then believe the government, fail to believe in democracy. And when you have no outlet for your anger, and you believe that you can't make a change democratically and peacefully using the mechanisms of the state because the government is behaving the way it's behaving, then what happens is the other route they take is violence. And this is historical. It's not something that Muslims are new to Muslims. In the history of this world, the reason why democracy was made is because in the past, when people were outraged at policies that they disagreed with, they could make change peacefully. Otherwise, you'd have to kill all the king and all the king's men. And democracy is failing these people, the Muslim leaders are failing these people, and the government is failing these people. Yes, they committed an evil act, but if you want to know why they're committing it, it's because of our foreign policy, our barbaric foreign policy, and our Muslim leaders and government failing to teach these young men there's a peaceful way forward.
Asghar, we're coming up to the news, and I can see that Jeff is itching to speak to you. And I also just want to ask you, so are you saying because of the foreign policy, if Iraq hadn't happened, if Afghanistan hadn't happened, there would be no attacks on the British public, there would have been no 9/11, none of this would have happened at all?
I want you to go back in history slightly more than that, because first you'll note that no attacks happened to Britain before the Iraq War. That's a fact. After the Iraq War, all the attacks occurred. However, a foreign policy is more than Iraq and Afghanistan. It's drone strikes, it's kidnappings, it's...
But 9/11 was pre-Iraq, wasn't it?
Yes, but it wasn't pre the foreign policy of killing 500,000 children via sanctions in Iraq. It wasn't the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It wasn't
Asghar,
dividing
hold
of
that thought. We're going to come straight back to you after the news. We're going to take a quick break and we'll carry on talking. Well, before we bring you that conversation from Baghdad, I want to just for a few more minutes continue the conversation about how to tackle Islamic extremism. And just before the news, Asghar Bukhari, founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee in London, was outlining very much that he felt this was down to foreign policy. And Jeff Mirza, a Muslim comedian, and Imran Awan, a criminologist at Birmingham City University, are still with us. Imran and Jeff, I don't know who first wants to speak to Asghar in response to his point.
Hello, Asghar. How are you? Good?
Very well, very well.
Okay, we know each other from time. Asghar, I've heard this argument before about the foreign policy, but I mean, I remember radicalisation, as far as I remember, started in when Bosnia was taking place. I remember meeting angry young men in the East End of London. It was like, what's happening in Bosnia? And Bosnia's over now. But the radicalisation's still there. I mean, I remember hearing Osama bin Laden on a speech somewhere saying, we want the Americans to leave the holy soil of Saudi Arabia. No, the troops have left.
But that proves my point. Bosnia is over, where 50,000 women were raped, right? And Bosnia is over. But guess what? Palestine isn't over. Yemen being bombed daily. Somalia warlords being backed by the CIA for 16 years, destroying that country. Afghanistan, Iraq, Waziristan. I mean, you're absolutely right. The proof in the pudding is your own words. You say that they became angry people because people... hundreds of thousands were killed in Bosnia, 50,000 women raped. Yes, people are going to be angry. And guess what? That isn't over. Across the Muslim world, foreign policy is destroying millions and millions of lives, and we have to just be honest about it. I'm not saying change foreign policy. If Britain and other countries want to continue that policy, that's up to them. But don't lie to the public and say it's not driving the anger across the Muslim world that leads to terrorism. Then they can make an informed decision. They can make that decision. But as long as we say it's not really foreign policy, then the British public will only have the belief that, if it's not foreign policy, then it's Islam. What else could it be? It's not the fairies.
So do you believe that if David Cameron got up and said, OK, we're changing our foreign policy because of what happened, this incident, do you think that would make a difference? That these people would suddenly
If David Cameron got up and had an ethical foreign policy tomorrow, terrorism would stop tomorrow.
I mean, I'd just like to add, I think...
Very briefly, we've got about 10 seconds left on this, Imran.
All right, I think Asghar probably missed the start of the show, because I did say at that point, as did I think Jeff, mentioned that the wars outside of Britain were and may be having an impact. Of course they are. Look at the drones. Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, used drones as a justification.
Imran, we've talked about this loads on World Have You Say, and I'm sure it's something we will return to. But thank you all for joining us on World Have You Say. We do now need to go over to Newsday's Shaima Khalil, who spent the morning...